Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Geo Trip. Joining us today is Dr. Raquel Bryant. She is a paleoceanographer and paleontologist whose research integrates microfossil and geochemical archives to understand how the ocean and its ecosystems responded to intervals of global warmth in the geologic past. Dr. Bryant is currently an assistant professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Wesleyan University. She is also a faculty fellow in the College of the Environment and the PI of the Earth Systems Studio at Wesleyan. Dr. Bryant is also a stalwart in the community of scholars seeking justice and equitable practices in geoscience and is currently interested in developing new methods to cultivate leadership skills among geoscientists. Dr. Bryant, welcome.
Thanks so much. I really liked that introduction. Excited to be here.
So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your geo story?
Yeah, so I grew up in Connecticut, which is really cool because now I have this tenure track job at Wesleyan University, which is a small liberal arts college in Connecticut, about 20 minutes from the town that I grew up in. And so I think for me, as being somebody who's interested in the earth and environment generally, it's a really cool opportunity that I'm kind of starting this particular geo journey in a place that means a lot to me, a place that I grew up in, a place that I spent a lot of time in. And now it's a place where I'm doing research, a place where I'm teaching students, a place where I'm mentoring students. So that's a little bit kind of about me too and how I go about my science. I feel like my identity as a scientist is really self-defined. It kind of includes all the things that I'm curious about. So beyond being really interested in ancient oceans and little tiny fossil microbes that are my favorite ocean storyteller, I'm really interested in everybody's kind of like story about how they're connected to the ocean and how that kind of inspires their connection to our world and our environment. In terms of science, I really appreciate the kind of timescale that being a geologist gives me to ask systems level questions. And so when I'm kind of interrogating the interaction between marine ecosystems and the ocean, I'm afforded the like very long timescales of, hundreds of millions of years sometimes to really understand how the world works. And then I take that into my work being an advocate and pursuing justice in geoscience and kind of ask similar questions, right? If we kind of blow up and look at really long timescales, what types of futures are possible when we think about centering justice and centering, as you mentioned, equitable practices and how we go about doing geoscience. So that's kind of all about me.
Wow, Raquel. That's a mouthful in a great way, because that's a lot of what we wanted to talk about with you today. So I'm going to dissect that a little bit for our listeners and for those who are just not as necessarily familiar with the type of work that you do. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
I'm going to take it back a little bit to the beginning of the geo story. You said you grew up in Connecticut. And so can you tell us what exactly got you interested in working with microfossils, being, a child in Connecticut, then a teenager, now a young lady, into like getting your doctorate? Like, how did you go from point A to point Z?
Yeah, I think one thing is just understanding how fossils and like these remnants of ancient life, how they speak to us about what the earth was like back then, and kind of really understanding that organisms create this really special relationship with their environment. And so that's kind of can exist on different scales. Like, for example, I'm from Connecticut. And so my relationship with Connecticut is fundamentally like different and kind of special. And when I was growing up, I was really into this video game called Zoo Tycoon. It was like a PC game where basically you make like exhibits. And let's say you had like a polar bear and you needed to make an exhibit for a polar bear. Well, of course, you couldn't make it like a tropical rainforest. You had to make it fit for the polar bear. And I loved this game because I felt like each animal had their own needs in terms of their environment. And it just really reminded me of this idea of like, as organisms, we're really connected to our environment. And around the same time, when I was like in my science classes in schools, is like middle school age, start learning about climate change and just how like okay, like all these habitats that organisms are perfectly suited for are now in threat, right? They're in danger of changing. And like, how is the organism going to cope with that? That was something that was really galvanizing for me as a kid. And then I was really angry because I felt like no, like grown-ups around me were really talking about it. So that really is what started my interest in just the environment in general. Like that was the first time I was like, I'm going to like go vegetarian because it's better for the environment, or I'm going to, carry a reusable water bottle. Like some of those like first kind of like, I don't know, like advocacy mindsets and kind of like habits. That's when that's where I started being interested in climate in general. And then when you go to college and you have the opportunity to kind of dig deep into something you're passionate about, I saw the earth sciences as a way to kind of double down on my interest in climate and learn about it from a different point of view. But it wasn't until like kind of into my studies, like kind of wanting to be a major in a geology program, that I took this course that was called Earth Systems. No, it was all about Earth systems history, but it was called like Earth Evolution of a Habitable Planet. And the idea was like, how do we get all of the like perfectly aligned, precarious conditions of the Earth to all, manifest at the same time to breed life on Earth, and then complex organisms, and then kind of the life and ecosystems we have today. And it was really fascinating to like take that really long timescale view of the Earth and its ecosystems. And I also, it was the first time I realized like that's something that a geologist does, because the only archives of those ancient ecosystems are rocks, or they're like fossils trapped up in rock. And so I started really connecting like, okay, my interest in understanding climate can be addressed by studying ancient climates, and kind of the vehicle to study ancient climates are all these different types of fossils. And then it wasn't until I had one of my first like research experiences as an undergrad in a NSF research experience for undergraduates, so REU, it's like a summer program, that I started working with forams. And I just realized they're a really cool fossil to study, because a lot of fossils have the issue of like, you maybe find like a femur or like some piece of the skull, but you rarely find like their whole body just preserved in a rock. But we don't have that problem with foraminifera. They're really tiny. They're unicellular. They're basically like microbes. And so oftentimes we not only preserve their entire body, but we preserve like entire communities of foraminifera. And so it's one of the most extensive and complete fossil records. So a lot of questions about evolution or ecology, or even paleoceanographic questions, are really well addressed using foraminifera as like the study organism. So that kind of first research experience really cemented like, okay, I'm interested in this topic, and now I'm interested in this tiny fossil to kind of be my vehicle into studying that topic.
Oh, Raquel, super great stuff. I don't know about you, Kyron, but Raquel, for our listeners and for me, and like I said, I don't think this is applicable to Kyron because I know he's also a water guy in this type of cool research. But can you, in plain language, describe or explain what foraminifera is for our listeners?
Totally. Yes, I'd love to. So a foraminifera, and we call them forams for short, are unicellular protists. So that means they have one cell, and they're eukaryotes. So they have cells just like us. They just have one of them. But what's really cool about foraminifera is that they make a calcium carbonate shell that we call a test around that one cell. So although they have like, squishy organic matter, like cellular material to them, they also make this more like what I like to say, like a sedimentary, like a geologic outer part. That's like their hard part. And so it's made up of the same material as rocks. And so they preserve really well in the fossil record. And so we can take ancient rocks, and we can take marine sediments, and we can wash them and actually extract these teeny tiny fossil foraminifera from them. And when I say teeny tiny, I mean they're about the size of a grain of sand. So the bigger ones, depending on the size, you can kind of see at least the little white dot with your eye. But they're called microfossils because for the most part, you need a microscope to really manipulate them and understand their morphology or their species identification or their shape, and how their maybe like chambers kind of change in size or shape or orientation or character. So I do a lot of my work after I've done all the work to kind of extract them and wash them out of rocks, then I sit at a microscope for a really long time and kind of look at not just like which species are present, but also their character, what shape are the shells that they make.
So these unicellular tiny organisms, why are they important to us? What do they tell us about the ancient oceans or the ancient climates?
Yeah, I love that question because it really positions also like other unicellular organisms, like other microbes, microbial organisms, as these really fantastic storytellers or like recorders, observers of environment. So for forams in particular, they live in the ocean. They live in the marine realm. And there are some variations of foraminifera that live on the seafloor. So they live kind of at the bottom of the ocean. But there are other foraminifera that live at kind of the top of the water column within the first couple hundred meters of the water. And so they're living at the top and they're living at the bottom, and their shells get preserved really well in the rock record. And because they're these unicellular organisms, they're in direct contact with the water mass all around them. And they use the water mass all around them to live their lives, right? To make food, to make their shell. And so they're recording the conditions of that water mass in their little bodies. So some ways they're recording that is geochemically. So within the isotope ratios of their calcium carbonate shells. Other ways they might be recording that is in the morphology of their shells, right? We see that forams that are forming in low oxygen environments, for example, have different shapes than forams that might be forming in places that are well oxygenated. So this is why I say they're really great ocean storytellers, because they're recording what the ocean is like in their little bodies through geochemistry or through their morphology. So that's why they can tell us a lot about how ancient oceans were.
So just how ancient are these organisms? How long have they been around?
Yeah, so forams evolved, like forams proper, probably about 500 million years ago. So the beginning of Phanerozoic and kind of like multicellular life as we know it. And then they diversified. They had this really big diversification event, which just means like a bunch of different species were formed in the Mesozoic, which is the time period that I really like to study. So that's in particular, I study about 100 million years ago. But during this time period, the world was really warm. There's a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. There's way more oceans. And so it's thought that forams went from just living on the ocean floor to seeing kind of all these new oceans they could occupy. And then they started living in higher parts of the water column. So up kind of in the photic layer in those first couple hundred meters, like I mentioned before. And so although they've been around for a long time, they've changed a lot too. And now forams exist in the present day. So there are also people who study modern forams, like take them into the lab and like culture them and observe them like in their labs or in the ocean. So it's really cool. We can look in the fossil record, but also compare to like what we know they're doing today to really understand how the fossil forams are telling us about ocean change.
So forams can tell us a lot about what was happening in the ancient ocean, and I guess by extension, what was happening in ancient climate. But with all of the drastic changes that are happening to climate today and that are forecasted to continue on into the future, why is it so important to look back at time past when it seems like we have more pressing climatic and oceanographic issues present and future?
This is one of my favorite questions to talk about as a geologist or as a geoscientist who studies archives, sedimentary archives. Because it's totally true. Like right now, there are like very urgent problems and like very like tangible realities that are happening, cascading effects to perturbing our climate system that's related to anthropogenic climate change. And in particular, like, not all humans, but like a set of corporations and countries who've decided to build their economies on a resource that is polluting the entire earth and changing climate everywhere. But we can go back in the past and there are times when things like this have happened before, right? And I don't mean exactly how they're happening now, right? Not humans emitting or companies emitting and changing our climate, but life or like external forces perturbing our systems, that has surely happened before. And that's a part of Earth's history. It's a part of how we got the Earth that we have today in a lot of ways. And so what my work does is look back into key intervals in Earth's history when climate perturbations were happening. In particular, what I studied for my dissertation is this event about 94 million years ago called Oceanic Anoxic Event 2, or OAE2. So like lots of acronyms, of course. But in this event, a lot of carbon dioxide was put into the atmosphere very quickly. And so we see events like that as analogs for what we're doing today. And so we can go back in time, and instead of being right smack dab in the middle of the event and only having that vantage point, we can look at before the event, during the event, and after the event to really understand how the marine ecosystem responded to that change in our carbon cycle. And that's really useful for understanding how our Earth might respond in the future, and for, in general, just understanding how our Earth works, because so much of, in my view, like the danger of this big carbon cycle perturbation that is anthropogenic climate change is that we don't even really know how our Earth works. And so we're changing things. And because of that ignorance, we can't even forecast what the consequences might be. And so some of this work looking in using ancient timelines to kind of see how systems work over large timescales is really informative for making models that can accurately accommodate the types of changes that we might expect to see in our climate system.
Wow, amazing stuff, Raquel. I don't even know where to begin to dissect, but I'd like to kind of take you back to word that you mentioned earlier, relationships. And I want to take that term relationships and I want to bring it in with what you do with these microfossils in terms of thinking about the past and what that means for the future. But also, I want to become a little interdisciplinary and think about what that means aside from the actual science and scientific processes. But if we were to think about it in terms of community, because one of the things that I admire and love talking to you about is when we think about the science and the community and the people. So do you mind if we delve a little bit into your environmental justice side?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And can you elaborate for our audience how being a scientist doing this type of research has actually brought you to where you are now in terms of this interdisciplinary platform that you stand on?
Yeah. From the beginning, I've always seen my academic journey as being interdisciplinary. And I think that really comes from my passion and interest for music. Like, I've been a singer and a songwriter and a musician for far longer than I've ever been a scientist. And so when I started my undergraduate career, it wasn't that weird that I felt like I was taking science and music and humanities and social science. Like, that just kind of felt like a reflection of the things that I was always interested in. But then when I got to grad school, and I feel like that is definitely a time where people are like, why would you like have extra hobbies? You're so busy doing like exactly this one thing, becoming an expert in exactly this one thing. But I think especially as a Black scientist, there's just like other things that you need to feel fulfilled, in particular, to understand your own identity as a Black scholar. Like, we just do differently. Like, and I don't know if they're swearing on this podcast, but we, as Black scientists, Black scholars, Black academics, the way that we go about not just our research and our scholarship, but our teaching and our mentoring of our students is just different. And like, I knew I wasn't going to get enough in terms of like resources or feedback or even like inspiration, you know, like role models, if I stayed only in the geosciences in particular. Like, there just legit wasn't any Black faculty to look up to because they just didn't exist. And so the idea of like reaching out to other departments was always like really front of mind for me in terms of like getting the professional development that I needed. And at those times, usually the Black faculty were in humanities disciplines, they were in Black studies, they're in history, right? They're in things outside of not just the geosciences, but the sciences usually. And so it's just always been like a really important part of my geo journey is to like stretch out and like learn from other disciplines. And I think that is related to my desire to like build community in the classroom. And actually, like, I loved how you posed the question about like relationships and how I use relationships in my research. Like I literally create little scripts to measure the relational differences in my like assemblages of foraminifera. That's like literally like the data that I extract from the stuff that I do. So like relationships are really important. And then the other side, like one of my main teaching philosophies is about community building, right? Giving students something to kind of like coalesce over, to come together about, that has nothing to do with the science. Because science usually has so many like, sometimes like ranging on traumatic to just like uncomfortable experiences like associated with it. And so like, how do you create a science classroom where people can bond over other things first and then use that as a point of strength to like start understanding the science? The way I put it too is like, I can make a connection with a student way quicker asking like, what's your favorite music, than like being like, have you ever seen a foraminifera? Like, right. Like that has so many like, what is a foram? Like, have I learned about this in class? Right. This is like so about science. And when you ask more about folks, just like life, right? Things that like actually really matter, not to say forams don't matter, but like to have the sense of urgency, like, yeah, what's your favorite song right now? Or what's your favorite food or your favorite color? I just find like building relationships kind of based on those more like, it just creates more connective tissue between your group. And so then when you're in the middle of a research project and you're really unsure of something, it doesn't feel that bad to ask for help, because like you're all connected. You have all these really strong ties that bind you together as a group. And so I've always just found that community building, whether it's in my classroom or in my research group, is just like, it's one of the priorities. Like research is of course important, but like to me, the best research happens when everybody feels like they're in a supported, like, I don't want to say family because it is like a job and there's, you know, we could talk about work-life balance and those kind of boundaries, but just that they like that their skills are valued and then it's a place where they can better themselves and that we're all trying to do that kind of as a collective.
No, I understand exactly what you mean. And I'm so grateful that you said some of the things you mentioned. And even that word that snuck in there, because I love that you're showing your whole dynamic self as a scientist. I think one of the issues in our field is that people try to separate or have to separate who they are as a person and the science they do. Whereas I think if we're able to show up as our whole dynamic selves, we could get better at our problem solving, right? Because we're bringing this or welcoming this diverse thought or this diverse space in. So thank you for your answer. Thank you for showing up as Raquel. I mean, oh my goodness, even though I am hopefully wrapping up my academic career as a student, I'm just so proud to see that we have people like you sitting in or are as professors now, right? Because that means that students can see someone that looks like them and acts like them and see that it's okay and I can be successful being me. So that brings me to wanting to just talk a little bit and congratulate you because you just completed your first year as a faculty member. So I love if you could share with our audience, what was like one of your most favorable or a professional story or class that you came up with that you like our audience to know that you're super proud of?
Well, so one thing that's really cool about my experience that I think it was just natural that I kind of took it for granted because it was something that became a part of my routine. But I think next year I'm going to really miss it. But I was involved in this interdisciplinary think tank. So part of my position at Wesleyan, I'm not just in the Earth and Environmental Sciences department. I'm also in this interdisciplinary college of the environment. So where students can major and minor in environmental studies. And the environmental studies program really takes like almost like a 3-prong approach to environmental studies. So there's like the science, physical science, natural science part of it, but then there's the social, policy, legal, government side of it. And then of course there's the artistic, creative, like embodiment side of it. And the students kind of have to take classes in all of those to be environmental studies majors. And one of the like flagship initiatives of this interdisciplinary college is getting together an interdisciplinary group of faculty fellows to meet throughout the year under a common theme and kind of explore how thinking about environmental issues with a group of interdisciplinary scholars can kind of maximize not only like your impact as a scholar, but also your scholarship and like who your scholarship reaches and who it's relevant for. and what kinds of methodologies that you can leverage. And so I had an amazing experience kind of like not only being in this think tank, but helping design it and kind of think about the theme and who would be invited to be in it. But I would say of the whole year, my proudest moment was I had this idea. We had one fellow who was virtual all year. And he is a scholar who does his field work in New Orleans. And I absolutely love going to New Orleans. The first time I went was for a conference, American Geophysical Union, big conference in 2017. And like me and my friends just had a blast. It was like such a cool place to be. And it just always kind of like drew me back. So I've been back a bunch of times, but then I had this opportunity to like spend our think tank budget on like a cool grown-up faculty spring break trip to New Orleans. And so as a group, we all went, and it was also a time for us to meet our virtual fellow for the first time, like in real life. But we did a whole week of like kind of touring New Orleans from different vantage points. We spent a day going and meeting like fisher folk that live kind of like on the Gulf Coast. And we went and saw an exhibit on extractivism. We went to the Whitney Plantation, which is the only plantation in Louisiana that isn't like an homage to the pageantry of the South, and instead is like really lays honor at the feet of the folks who were enslaved there and centers them and their histories and legacies. And we even went to like a second line parade, right? And like danced in the streets and like just really had this immersive experience and kind of like writing retreat that not only brought us together, kind of hitting back on the community building part, but we learned so much being together. And another thing I loved about it that was really connected to some of my other work is like, it was a very intergenerational group of people. Like I was like the youngest faculty. I'm turning 30 this year, all the way up to, associate professors who are more established in their career. But we really had this kind of like hodgepodge group of people who had their own perspectives from the personal, from the academic, from the scholastic. And we all got to meet in one of like the true melting pots of the world, I will say. New Orleans is where like many worlds meet in so many different ways. So that was definitely a proudest moment, just like actually getting us there.
Sounds incredible. So for the students who are just as excited as I am hearing about the work that you're doing at Wesleyan, a little Brady told me that you may be recruiting master's students for 2024. Why should students consider you? And do you have any advice for students who wish to apply?
Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, so I mentioned that I'm at Wesleyan University, which is this small liberal arts college, but one kind of like secret weapon that we have that I feel like people don't know too much about is that we do have a small master's program. And so the benefits of being a master's student at a place like Wesleyan is there's about 8 of you total. And so when you think about going into grad school and kind of like the ideas of mentorship and working really closely with an advisor at Wesleyan, like you can't really get closer to your advisor. And that's the type of place where we can do really close mentoring at the graduate level, which isn't, especially for the master's level, isn't really a characteristic of most departments. So that's really exciting. The other part of it is it's really welcoming to students who have maybe not had a traditional background in geology or the geosciences. So you could come to Wesleyan off the strength of your background in chemistry or physics or biology or archaeology or environmental studies, for example, and then be able to kind of catch up and take the earth science, environmental science classes that you need to do your project and kind of build on that to whatever you want to do after the master's. The other thing that I'm excited to explore about the master's program at Wesleyan is just this idea of doing a more interdisciplinary master's that's more rooted in environmental studies. And I think through my kind of like appointments in both places, that's something that's really possible. And thinking about the idea of like, what would it be like to get a master's at like a small liberal arts college where you could think really interdisciplinary in a really interdisciplinary way about like the type of data that you want to synthesize or the data you want to collect. I know I've talked to a lot of prospective students about kind of marrying the physical sciences with the social sciences or the physical sciences with like art and what kinds of like projects we could do at that intersection. And I mentioned before, I'm an artist. And so I'm always interested in like interrogating these boundaries between and these silos between disciplines. And I think coming to a place like Wesleyan, there's so many people who are already doing that. It's actually an opportunity to explore that at the graduate level. the last plug I'll make for working with me in particular, kind of like zooming more in, is that I'm going on this expedition through the International Ocean Discovery Program. And we're drilling offshore Greenland to kind of uncover these archives of how the Greenlandic ice sheet has evolved and changed and responded to climate change over the last 20 million years. And the pitch is that it's like new sediment, like new mud coming from the ocean that like no one in the world has ever seen, like just period. So it's a chance to kind of work on stuff through that. But also this is like a new time period and a new location for me. And I'm really interested in students who are like totally jazzed about the Arctic and want to like take a leadership role in kind of uncovering some of these histories and seeing what the forums have to tell us about what happened in Northwest Greenland. But like I said, it's so different than what I've been doing that I'm really keen to have like students who like have a passion in understanding the Arctic and the dynamics there to kind of lead those projects.
That's some great stuff, Raquel. And that project sounds amazing. Do you think they're going to let me apply as a master's student, even though I'm wrapping up a PhD? Because I want to work on some of this stuff.
Totally. Well, I mean, it's two parts of that question. Yes. And the program as we know it is actually coming to a close, the International Ocean Discovery Program. But we have been drilling for decades at this point, like since the 60s in some way or another. So there are these vast archives between Japan, Germany, and the US that holds just like meters and meters and meters of ocean sediment. And so there's really cool projects that one could do just requesting core samples from stuff we've already drilled. And actually, I'm part of a team of early career scientists who are hosting a workshop in College Station at the Gulf Coast Core Repository in like this August to kind of look at that, like the entangled histories and realities and like imaginaries about IODP, this drilling program, and how we can think about the past and the present so that we can plan a future. Because right now there's no program, right? The NSF, the National Science Foundation, made an announcement that they're not renewing our program. So like the normal way we've been doing scientific ocean drilling is no more. And so we kind of have this opportunity as a community. I've taken the stance of like, let's not like be sad and somber about this, but let's see it as an opportunity to like take a beat, pause, and really like reflect on what this program has been and what it has meant to our broader like earth science, ocean science community, but also like what it's lacked and like what it hasn't been, especially for scientists from marginalized identities, right? Like there have been negative experiences on the drilling ship or negative experiences related to being really integrated into the scientific ocean drilling community. And so this workshop we're hosting is really to like hold all of those realities together and see like where we can go from there.
Wow, Raquel, you wrapped that up so beautifully. And so it's been amazing just listening to you. As I get ready to bring us to a close, I would love to ask you, based off of that statement you just made, let's not be sad and somber about something ending. And I know you're talking about drilling, but I want to just think about this as a universal statement in terms of let's not be sad and somber. Let's be ourselves. Let's bring our whole selves when we're approaching problems, whether they're old or new problems. With that in mind, if there's something that you could say to freshman Raquel or any freshman geoscientist coming into the field or student interested in becoming a geoscience or, being an interdisciplinary scientist, what's a piece of advice that you'd give them that you wish someone had given to freshman Raquel?
Ooh, I love this question. Well, I think any advice to first year students is just like, keep going. You got it. Like your first year is not really a true reflection on your abilities or even your potential in college. Like, it's not like the first year is like, oh, if I did well or did bad, that means I'm going to do well or do bad after this. Like, honestly, no, like you're like coming into a totally new environment and living a totally different life. And like, for some people, they totally soar and excel. And other people, it's just like a constant battle every day with like, can I do this? And so that first year, really just take the space and time and give yourself the grace to just like mess up and have to like redirect. And this is probably like, as a professor, I shouldn't be saying things like this, but like your classes are not that important, and like join some student organizations, do things that like you'll be able to do after you graduate. Because if you put your whole life into classes and things that are like fundamentally finite, you'll find like after classes end, you don't really know like what direction. It's really hard. It's harder to pick a direction. And so, for example, like I was in an a cappella group and on the cheerleading team, like my whole time as an undergrad. And like, those were places where I felt like it was like the opposite of science, right? Sometimes I would go into my science classroom and I felt like it was asking me to leave all my identities except scientist at the door. Like nothing else matters. You come in here to learn about rocks and that's all that matters. But when I went into a cappella or cheerleading, right, like I could be my whole self. And sometimes I could even leave science, like, and like that feeling, that like liberation of not having to like put myself in a box and really being my full self. That's the stuff that helped me then go study after, or help me then take my test and feel confident. And I feel like if I didn't also give myself the space to do stuff that wasn't science, I wouldn't have had things that like had poured into me in a way that raised my self-esteem enough to like withstand how science sometimes like tore it back down. So definitely like, yeah, first year is like for tries, like really go into it with just like trying things out. And it's not just all about classes, like really get involved in some community in some way.
It sounds like the theme for today is showing up as your whole self. Thank you. So here at the GeoTrip, we believe in balance. So aside from sharing technical insights, we like to share little insights about our guests as well. So Raquel, welcome to Hot Potato. Ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
All right. Do we get the full Dr. Bryant on Twitter or on Instagram? Which is your platform of choice?
Oh, definitely Twitter.
I think I saw that one coming. All right. It's summertime. What's the current book on your nightstand?
Oh, so I have to admit, I'm not really like a reader. I think reading is like hard for me, but I love listening to books. And I just purchased a new book. It's called Ordinary Notes by Christina Sharp. Christina Sharp is a preeminent Black Studies scholar, but Christina Sharp's last book, In the Wake, was really fundamental for me understanding and kind of awakening the intersections between geology and Black studies. And I'm just as hopeful that this book, Ordinary Notes, will be just as like inspiring. So
added to my wish list. Right. And this is going to be a tough one, but as a singer and as a fan, Tina Turner or Whitney Houston?
Oh, it is so tough because of like the current events, but I got to go with Whitney.
Man, I set you up with that question.
Yes. But I appreciate it. And like Tina Turner, important because at the end of the second national conference, which is this conference that I held last summer, we did end with a big Tina Turner number. So there's always, obviously both of them amazing, but I will go with Whitney.
Thank you for giving us the first answers that come to mind, though. You only have 2 more to go.
Okay.
So if your life were a movie, what would be your theme song?
There's this song, I think it's by Billy something. The I'm Still Standing. Dun, 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 dun. I heard about it the first time in Sing, the movie, and I love that movie. So it's that song. It's just like about getting knocked down and like always coming back no matter what.
I actually just watched Sing on my flight back from Madison, where I had the pleasure of actually hanging out with you for a little bit. So I know the song. Karen, I'm going to send this to you for you to listen if you haven't watched it.
Elton John. It's Elton John. I'm probably disgracing him by not remembering, but it's really great. It's a great song.
It is.
It is. It definitely is. And last but not least, because you also touched about the second national conference, which we'd probably love to have you back on another episode to elaborate on. But last but not least, if you could have dinner with anyone who's contributed or identified with being Black in geoscience and the historical amazing work that has been done, and even the future work that is currently underway, who would it be? Anyone dead or alive?
100% Randolph Brommery, who is in a lot of ways like, I don't want to say he's haunting me, like that's negative, but it's just like somebody who in the past has just like done a lot and has really inspired me with their life. And I don't know, it's kind of selfish. I just want to know if he thinks like I'm doing a good job, or if like he's proud of me, or if I'm like desecrating his legacy. Like I just love to know that. So I want to have dinner with him. Yeah.
That was the perfect answer if we could ever design one, because literally our closeout is letting you know what an inspiration you are to myself and so many in this field. So thank you for that answer, Raquel. And honestly, thank you for being here on this episode of the GeoTrip, where we've discussed everything from microfossils and the importance of storytelling in climate to storytelling as a person in geoscience who's interested in the interdisciplinary aspects, understanding what equity looks like, what bringing your whole self looks like, and what collaboration or how collaboration is important for us in not only problem solving, but fostering community. I mean, it's been such a pleasure. It was well worth us trying to sync up calendars and travel schedules. I know we've only touched on the tip of the iceberg here today, but please know that you have an open invitation to return. We'd love to actually just have an episode dedicated to us talking with you about the second national conference, like what planning looked like, future plans, etc. But as we wrap up, and thank you for being here, please let our listeners know where they can follow and connect with you, because we love to amplify our colleagues and their professional journeys.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you for that closeout. I really appreciate you too, and just the like space to be my full self. It doesn't like necessarily, I'd say more and more it crops up in geoscience spaces, which I think is like just a result of like all of the collective work, like even between the three of us that we've been doing in our fields. It's not like this in other fields. Like we're blowing it up in geoscience, and I'm super proud of all of us. And this is why I'm so interested in us being like a really tight knit group so that we keep it up our whole careers. So I just thank you all for making the space on GeoTrip. You can find my stuff. I'll just say my website, which is raquelbryant.com. You'll go there and you'll be like, there's nothing here, but soon, one day in the future, there'll be more things. And from there you can get to like my Twitter, or like the papers, the science papers I've done, or my projects. If you want to learn more about this justice and geoscience stuff or second national conference, all that stuff is there. So I'll point everyone there. Thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, listeners. On behalf of Dr. Prince and myself, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the GeoTrip. We will be back next month with another exciting installment. But until then, you can also follow us on Twitter at GeoTrip Podcast. And look out, the website's coming soon. It's in the works. But have a great day. Signing out.
See you next time.